Hello and welcome to lesson number 10, looking at GCSE families. This is feminist perspectives on the family. Right, so I gave you some homework which I asked you to do, which was on page 51. You would have had to do some reading on feminism, and now we move to looking at the answers on page 51. So here the first question was, identify the perspective from which Delphi and Leonard are writing from. Now, this were your options. You had functionalist, Marxist, feminist, and interactionalist, and given that this is all about the feminist perspective today, that would be the correct answer. Then, moving into question number 2, who do Delphi and Leonard argue contribute the most to families but gain the least? You have men, children, pets, and women. They argue it is women who are the ones who gain the least but do the most. Question number 3, identify what is meant by the term dual burden, which is known as the double burden or the double shift. You have peeling all the vegetables and doing all the washing up, mowing the lawn and hoovering the carpets, having a part-time job and doing the majority of the domestic labor, and feeding the pet and feeding the children. It is having a part-time job and doing the majority of the domestic labor. Now, this was a question in the 2018-19 GCSE paper. So this is a concept which you do need to know about. So yes, please make sure you know the difference between, in particular, the double shift and the triple shift, which is question number 4. What is meant by the triple shift? We have peeling all the vegetables, doing the washing up and dusting the house, mowing the lawn, hoovering the carpets and dusting the house, having a part-time job, doing the majority of the domestic labor, and providing emotional support to the husband and children. And then you have feeding the pet and feeding the children and feeding the husband. So which one it would be? It is the having a part-time job but doing the majority of the domestic labor and providing emotional support to the husband and children, all of which is seen as some form of labor. Question number 5. As radical feminists, what did Delphi and Leonard see as the ultimate cause of gender inequality in families? You have a choice of a lack of effective legislation, such as laws on equal pay and better provision of free childcare, allowing women to manage a career and a family instead of having to choose, patriarchy, capitalism, or the triple shift. It is patriarchy. Anytime when it comes particularly for radical feminism, the cause of most of, if not all, the problems come from the patriarchy. Then question number 6, last one, why do women become economically dependent upon their husbands? Because they have to give up their jobs, careers to take on the parenting role, meaning their husband is the sole source of income for the family, or because the husbands generally earn more, because it is natural order of families that men provide money and women provide care, or because they develop addictions to online gambling that their husbands then have to pay for. You would be correct if you said it was because they give up their careers so they can take on the parenting role. Given that, then the husband will become the breadwinner for the family. Okay, fantastic. So let's look at what we are wanting to achieve by the end of today. I want you to be able to confidently be able to answer this question, which is, how do feminists explain the functions of the family? You have a choice. We'll go over giving the answers. This is what we're going to do. So we want to be able to talk about this with a degree of sensitivity. I want you to, we've done the check the reading homework and multiple choice answers. We're going to identify some different feminist perspectives on families. So you need to evaluate what is the most effective argument. And then lastly, we will be doing an exam practice question. This won't be for homework. This will just simply be during this lesson. Here we go. So, now Delphi and Leonard, they wrote from a radical feminist perspective, but you would know this isn't the only feminist perspective, and what others can you think of? I want you to look at the pictures here, and it should hopefully give you a bit of a clue. If you aren't too sure, then you will hopefully get some answers from this slide. So let's look at the types of feminism. So hopefully you would have been able to get liberal feminism being the one which sort of kicks off the whole thing. It's the variety of feminism that works with the structure of mainstream society then to integrate women into that structure. So, for example, the suffragettes wanted to be integrated in the right to vote, and the second wave, it was to do with equality in the workplace. So, first and second wave feminism would sort of fall under that umbrella. Then you have radical feminism, which is the view that the oppression of women is the most fundamental form of oppression. So one that cuts across the boundaries of race, culture, and economic. It doesn't matter whether you're low class, it doesn't matter whether you're white, black, Asian, you will still be, the main form of oppression is if you are a woman. Then we have the Marxist or Socialist feminism, and some people try to separate the two. You can, but for the meantime, because it's to do with economics, Marxism recognizes that women are oppressed, and attributes the oppression to the capitalist or private property system. So they insist that the only way to end this oppression is actually to overthrow the capitalist system. And then you have cultural feminists, which are a radical feminism whose movement to transform society. So cultural feminism is sort of retreated to vanguardism, working instead to build a women's culture. So they're the group that are about building women's shelters, having women specifically for like women-focused law firms, women-focused agencies, women-focused, different aspects of society. So instead of trying to bring women into society, they tend to change parts of society to cater for the needs of women. And I've got this other little funny one here called ecofeminism. And I say funny, its basic tenet is that patriarchal society will exploit its resources without regard to long-term consequences. And as a direct result, the attitudes fostered in the patriarchal hierarchical society means that men are ultimately more wasteful and destructive. So ecofeminism sort of tries to address this. So you probably won't know too much about the bottom two, but the liberal, radical, and Marxist is what our focus will be on. So we will be looking at a video on this. So these dogs are very excited, and so am I. So we're going to look at some video on different perspectives. Now, you will see on page 54 that your page has been divided into 3 different viewpoints. So I want you to use this table to take notes on each strand of feminist theory in relation to the families. It is important that you get down any ideas that you are unsure of. But if there's things that you're already well aware of, that's obvious. You don't need to write that down because you know it. So try to focus on the things which that you don't know, and take the time to pause the video. Even now, it might be a good idea just to remind yourself what the difference is between radical, Marxist, and liberal is, if you have already forgotten before we move into the video. Now, I do apologize for the trash audio. It is quite bad, so I'll try my best to fix it up in the post-production, but hopefully it's enough that you'll be able to take some quality notes. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Karen, and today I'm going to be asking myself about feminism. So let's see what I've got to say about it. So ladies, is society really that sexist? Right, okay, I'm a radical feminist, and I tell you, the main problem in society is patriarchy. Men, they just think they own the place, but they don't. Women should fight back, they should sort men out, and sort society out once and for all. Well, I'm a Marxist feminist, and as a Marxist feminist, I believe that it's capitalism that is to blame for all the women's problems. It weakens women and it weakens men. And if we could get rid of capitalism and change to a communist state, then I think women's problems would all disappear. Well, I'm a liberal feminist, and as a liberal feminist, I recognise that although things did used to be sexist in society, I actually think things have got a lot better these days, and I can't really think of any way in which society is still sexist. Can you? Right. I think what we need to get straight here is that women are just takers of shit in society. We take shit from our husbands, we take shit from our bosses, we take shit from just men in general on the street, looking at our tits and so on. I'm sick of taking shit. I'm not taking any more shit. I tell you what I am going to do though, I'm going to go on a baby strike, right? Because men, they're not listening to a word we're saying. And the only way we're going to get them to listen to us is to say, right, I'm not having any more babies. So you sit down and listen to my demands. No more babies until you listen to what I'm saying. Okay, what about the work?
Okay, so as much as some of this might seem a little bit ridiculous, hopefully you're getting the core tenets of what is going on here. So you've got your Marxist, your liberal, and you've got your radical viewpoints. And I understand that particularly what the radical is saying might come across as a bit ridiculous, but this is a legitimate talking point that radical feminists have raised. So already you can talk a little bit about what's their viewpoint on to do with family and perhaps even child rearing. Is they view perhaps child rearing as a way to kind of keep women in a form of an oppressed state.
You know, men did used to earn a lot more money than women, but since the Equal Pay Act was introduced, men and women legally have to be paid the same amount of money if they're doing the same job. So really, we've got quite a lot of equality at work these days. Right, well, women are doubly exploited, right? They're exploited at work by the bosses, bossing them around, telling them what to do all day. So they're being exploited at work, and then when they get home, they're exploited at home by the husbands. The husbands telling them what to do, cook this, clean that. So they're doubly exploited. Whereas the men, they're only like once exploited when they're at work. So, you know, it's double trouble for women. Okay, let's talk about women getting promoted. Women generally cannot get to the best managerial positions. They're stopped by this glass ceiling, you know, and a lot of the time they take time off to give birth and raise children. You know, it's not our fault that we're the ones who get pregnant and have to give birth, but then it hinders our career. We can't get promotions, we can't get the managerial jobs, and we're just constantly being kept down by men who think they own the place. And I am sick of it, and it has to change. It has to change now.
Okay, so the radical feminists have brought up a point of the glass ceiling. Now, if you don't know what that is, I want you to write down the glass ceiling, and I want you to look that up then later. I think this will be discussed, that you should already know this. So if you're still not too sure, then please, I want you to highlight that, and I want you to come back to that, as we won't be covering that in this video, but we probably will cover it in a future video. And then you already had the Marxist feminists talk about then the double shift.
Yeah, but women keep men healthy. You know, the man has like a stressful day at work, he goes home, he's all angry, the wife calms him down, de-stresses him, nice meal on the table, go to bed with her at night, and then he wakes up in the morning, all chilled out, ready to put in another good day's work at the factory. So the women are keeping the men healthy, keeping the men working, and that helps the bourgeoisie. Don't even get me started on the workplace. Women are so likely to suffer sexual harassment at work from their bosses, from their colleagues, and then when they get home, they're most likely to suffer domestic violence, marital rape, incest, abuse. Women, girls, they're just victims of male patriarchy. It's got to stop, because men are constantly taking advantage of women sexually, emotionally, financially, everything you can think of. Men are taking advantage of women, and I, for one, want it to stop. Okay, I admit that domestic violence and sexual abuse, sexual harassment used to be common problems experienced by women, but I really think that since the introduction of laws, we can now recognise that it's becoming less and less taboo. and women are no longer afraid to speak out, to say they've been a victim of violence. So I think that is coming down a lot these days. Okay, what about a woman's role in the family though? Well, women raise the next generation of workers for free. You know, they give birth to them, then they raise them, and the capitalists get the next generation of workers in the factory, ready to work, and the women have done it all for free. You know, so the women's role is helping the bourgeoisie. Okay, I think we all agree on one thing. Men are bastards, right? They ruin our lives, they take our money, they take advantage of us. In fact, I think generally that the world would be a better place if men weren't in it. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, what about sex? Then, you know, why don't we just be lesbians, live in female-only households? And, you know, I think things would generally be better that way, because women are kinder, women are nicer, and everything would be fair and equal if we didn't have men. And, you know, again, if you're thinking about, well, how are we going to have birth? Well, that's what sperm banks are there for. So we don't need men in the bedroom. We don't need men in a relationship. We should just live in female-only households. And if you really, really want to have a baby, use a sperm bank. Whoa, 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 calm down. I can see you're both getting quite het up about this. But what I'd like to say is that I think things are constantly improving for women. Yeah, things were bad in the past, but things just keep getting better and better and better for women. You could call it the march of progress view, if you like. Okay. Could you please just sum up your final thoughts on the matter, please? All this extremism just gives feminists a bad name. Really, I think what everyone wants in society is equality. We don't want to banish men. We don't want to have a communist revolution. We just want things to be a little bit fairer. So I think as a liberal feminist, as the voice of reason, I think we need to say, slow down on those crazy ideas and let's be sensible about this. Let's just try and have equality rather than revolution. Right, I think we can all agree here that patriarchy is the main problem in our society. Men have had it too good for too long. You know, sociology is male stream, isn't it? It's written by men, about men, for men. But there's some areas that we, radical feminists, think are really important. And we finally managed to get them put on the map, like domestic violence, conjugal roles, housework. You know, these are important things to us. So we've managed to get it on there, get people thinking about it, and show that things are still far from being equal in society. And I, for one, will not stop until society is completely fair. Well, I've heard what your arguments are, but I still think I'm right. I think the Marxist feminist position is the strongest one, because I think that capitalism is to blame, and if we get rid of capitalism and change to a communist state, women's difficulties would all disappear. Well, you're entitled to your opinions, but I think you're just far too extreme, and I think what we really need to recognise is that men are not really the enemy. Most men are actually quite nice people, and we need to try and learn to live in harmony with them rather than attacking them, because that's just being as bad as they used to be to us, isn't it? Okay, thank you for that, ladies. So what we've seen today is that feminists have got a range of viewpoints on the family and on society. The radical feminists are the extremists. They want to see massive social change and an end to patriarchy. The Marxist feminists, on the other hand, want to see a change to a communist state where they think the exploitation of both men and women will finally come to an end. The liberal feminists recognise that social change has been achieved over the past few decades and that finally we're reaching a state of sexual equality. So the only thing left to do now is for you to make up your mind about which opinion, if any, you agree with.
Brilliant. Okay. So we covered a range of different viewpoints around this, and hopefully during this time you will be able to add to your page. Now, I will say that this isn't exactly unbiased in the way that they presented things but hopefully it sort of paints you a rather good picture. Now, obviously, I have my viewpoints on this, and I'm sure you do as well. So I want you to pen those down, and then on page 55, I want you to actually tell me which perspective or combination of perspectives do you find the most convincing. Which one do you think? And you need to give an answer. Now, I will say that this was a question that came up on the PPE for the Year 11s this year, and it was to discuss to what extent would feminists agree that marriage has changed for women, or something along those lines. Now, a lot of people got confused and they just simply talked about how marriage has changed, but they never really talked about feminism itself. Now, you have your liberal feminists who would agree that there's been a lot of changes actually that have happened, and what those are a result that, yeah, you can say feminists have had a huge role in that, in bringing equality in the workplace, and which in turn also reflected then at home, because women, when they got equality in the workplace, it meant they were more likely to then be in full-time work, and as a result that did have an impact on marriage. Whereas the radical feminists would completely disagree and say that no, there's been like zero change because patriarchy is still in place. And the Marxists would say, well, no, it's made no difference whatsoever because the capitalist system still exists, the bourgeoisie is still exploiting the lower classes, and that is reflecting in how men behave at home. In particular, when we heard the warm bath theory that was spoken about. All right. So there is also the black difference feminist perspectives on families as well, and so they view things a little bit different. They say the family is a source of refuge from a racist society or people of colour living in countries like the UK, USA, and European countries. And this is what they believe. They believe that living in a racist society is a problem for all people of colour, both women and men, and as a result, you have white feminists, they're not really going to understand the true experience that they go through, because they only have to deal with patriarchy, not racism as well. And people of colour, it's not all the same. So Chinese women's social experiences are not identical to Bangladeshi women in British society. However, women of colour are likely to experience racism as well as experience sexism in British society. Again, this is the position that they hold. The Black Difference feminist movement argues that the family is a genuine source of comfort, and so you can see why the family is such an important part for them, because it acts as an escape from the racism which they would have to deal with. So you have then an application task, which I want you to identify the ways in which the family can be a place of comfort and security from the experience of living in an institutionally racist society. So you've got some examples there, but I want you to point to maybe some, if you can find them, that might come from within Britain and outside of Britain. And if you're not too sure, and if you've already forgotten, institutional racism is when racism has become structural and has moved beyond individual acts. Now, it is up to a rather large debate as to whether or to what extent of society is institutionally racist, or even sexist. So you heard, like, for example, the liberal feminist arguing, well, no, it's no longer institutionally sexist, because of the fact we have all these laws that are in place. So, given that we have now finished this, here begins our exam question. So, I want you to identify and explain one factor that can explain the fact that women in families tend to do more housework and childcare, referred to as a concern in item A. Now, this is a style question that you'll get, and it confuses a lot of people, because here, here's your item, right? And it's saying women do more housework and childcare than men. Now, you can completely ignore item A. You can actually completely ignore it and do it. So it's just one factor that can explain why women in families tend to do more housework. That's really what it's asking you. So you don't even really need item A at all. It just talks about some statistics When it came to unpaid chores at home, women were doing almost 40% more. Men averaged 16 hours a week compared to 26 by women. Those on maternity leave doing the most. The area men do more is transport, such as driving. On the report, the ONS identified unpaid work, which households do themselves, but could only pay someone else to do for them. The ONS calculated that women would earn £259 a week on average if this unpaid work was remunerated, while men's efforts would earn £166 on week. So it's sort of suggesting that, like, if you were to put a pound figure for the amount of what the women were doing, then the women's work was more valuable. And then moving on, the statistics also revealed that the average amount of time parents devoted to childcare has fallen slightly since 2000, whilst increasing for the over 60s. I guess what this is sort of suggesting is that parents are spending a lot less time with their children, and instead they're devoting a lot more time to work or joint conjugal roles, which is where the sort of the chores are shared. I'm quite interested as to what your experience might be, but my experience is that the housework, I would say, was pretty much split pretty even between my parents. So my dad was more outdoorsy, so he would be more on the gardening side of things, whereas my mum was probably more indoors, but she would also do yard work as well. So my dad was very good at cooking, so was my mum. So they were both, spending time cooking, and as a result, we were then as children encouraged to follow. And this is why I personally argue that it is important that parents spend time with their children, teaching them how to do these things, because I would say that I'm quite self-sufficient in that regard. And here is the way you want to go about answering this. Now, this is how you do it. You need to give me a factor. So one factor that can explain it. It can be whatever, for whatever reason, but then you need to tell me what that actual reason is. So here's one factor. So one of the factors is this. Here's the reason, and then I want you to tell me what effect that has on the relationship or the family, or particularly the wife, the female. So tell me a factor, list the reason, tell me what the effect is, and if you do that, you will get 4 marks. Pause the video here, answer, and then I will tell you how you do it. Okay, let's look at 2 model answers. So let's put this back up again, factor, reason, and effect. And you should be able to see this painted out quite clearly for you. So one reason why women tend to do more housework and childcare is because women are more likely to be in part-time jobs. There's your factor. There's your AO1, tick, done. Now let's go into the reason. This can mean that they spend more time in the home, which gives them more opportunity to complete more of these tasks, and as a result of working part-time, their partner also expects them to complete more of these tasks as he or she is the breadwinner. This means that women end up with the double burden or even triple shift of paid work, housework, and childcare. Now, some people can say, well, this is like the Marxists would say, well, this is unreasonable, but then your New Right would say, well, no, that's completely reasonable because they get to stay at home. And if they get to stay at home, they're not having to go and work and do all this stuff. And it's not like they're not being cared for. So the fact that the husband goes and earns the money and provides for his wife, in effect, she is getting paid because she's getting a house, she's getting food and everything, and her role then is to simply turn that into a home. So, and that's why women are known as homemakers in that regard. So this is the position of the New Right or the fundamentalists. So one reason why, and here's the next answer. So you could do this one as well. One reason why women tend to do more work and childcare is because of patriarchal expectations held by men in family. So there's your reason. Oh, sorry, it's your factor. Let's go into the reason. This can mean that men believe that their wage-earning position means that they don't need to do as much housework as women. So you don't earn as much as me, therefore I don't need to do as you don't work as much as me, therefore I shouldn't have to work as well at home. And they believe it is a role of it is their role to be the breadwinner. So they play the instrumental role whilst women play the expressive. This may include in families where women also work but end up with a double burden of both housework and paid work. So the effect is that women end up doing a triple shift or double shift, double burden. So there's your answers. This would easily get 4 marks. So now you know what you need to do for these questions in the future. But yes, anytime you do get these questions where it says, well, what's going on with item 8, you could ignore what is going on in item 8. It's just simply saying, why is it that this is happening? Why is it that men average 16 hours a week when doing housework, whereas women do 26? And so these answers then would adequately explain as why this is the case, and this is where we will be finishing things for the meantime. So I believe we're heading into the Easter term. I'll continue to probably produce more of these videos. So until then, I will see you in the next video.